So it's now time to create our next application. And what we're going to do is create a very simple calculator. And we're going to understand a little bit more after going through this, how to lay out our designs, how to use the various tools within Android Studio to help us create layouts, and also how to get buttons and some other views, which we talked about in the previous project, how to get those working and what they all mean. So to start out, first thing we need to do is create a new project. And I've got my Android Studio application opened, and I've got it, I clicked on start a new project. So I need to enter the base details, and I'm going to call this one simply calculator. Obviously you can call it whatever you would like, and it's saving it to my default location. So I'm going to click on next. And much the same as we did in the previous application, we're just going to do exactly the same settings. So setting it to API 16, phone and tablet, everything else not selected. Click on next. We're going to choose a blank activity. Click on next. We're going to leave all these names as the default names and click on finish. Android Studio will now open the project. And once that's done, we can actually get started. Okay, it's now loaded. I'm going to go and set mine to presentation mode so we can see it a bit clearer. Okay, make a bit of space here because we're going to be referring to those throughout this video. And we're ready to go. And actually what I'll do is I'll open the project up as well. Okay, let's give ourselves a bit less space there because we're going to be focusing to a large extent in this initial video on the actual interface. Okay, so let's make a start. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to be creating a calculator app, as I said, just a very basic calculator that enables you to enter two numbers and enter the operators, plus, minus, divide, etc., multiplication, and it'll actually do that to the two actual numbers that we've actually got, that we're going to actually enter on screen. So what we want to do is, first thing we want to do is make sure that we're actually opened in our layout. Now, as you saw when I created this new project, it automatically went to that layout automatically. But if by chance it hasn't, make sure project in the top left-hand corner is selected, which I'll do now. Then just follow, click on the arrows that go down, then click on down into app, click on source, keep going down, clicking on res, clicking on layout, activity main. So you double click on that if it wasn't showing, and that would bring you to the screen. So for this one, you can see that we've got the screen showing, and it's just the hello world, which is the default state that, or the default blank project that Android Studio creates. And you can see it's using up here what's called a relative layout. But what we're going to do is we're going to use another type of layout. We're going to use a layout that's called a linear layout. Now the linear layout, as you see, is just another way of putting items on the screen. It's actually keeping track of all the various components or views that we're going to be using. And it's just a style or a way of actually drawing things on the screen. So Android provides us with a number of different layouts, and each of those have got different functionality. And as you go through the course, you'll see these different layouts in practice or in use. But what we're going to do for this one, we're going to change it from a relative layout to a linear layout. So linear layout is probably not as powerful as the relative layout, but in the application that we're creating now, it's going to be very useful. So one of the things you can't do in this design tab, this is the design tab of Android Studio when you're creating your layout, is you can't change the relative layout there. There's no option to change it. The only way you can actually change this relative layout is to click on the text tab down the bottom and change this here to linear. So I'm going to type in linear, and as I start typing, you can see that Android Studio is automatically coming up saying, do you mean linear layout? So I'm going to click on that to select that one. And actually what I should have done, I'll go back and undo that. So I wanted to show you what it does. So if I start typing that again, notice as I'm typing, down the bottom is also making the changes for us, linear layout. I can type. If I press enter there, it's now actually updated both the top and the bottom, and it's changed it. And that's a good feature because if we're making a change, we need to actually make sure that the change is reflected at the start and also at the end. And Android Studio has done that for us. So if you go back to the design tab again now, we'll see that so once to update, this will actually happen. It's actually good that it's actually come up and shown that for us now. Sometimes you'll find that this doesn't update, and we've got that little red arrow that does come up. If we go back to text layout again, or to text view, like so, you notice I had to click twice there, click back again, it should actually fix it up. And you can see it's now fixed it up and updated it. That was just actually an error that actually happened with Android Studio. So if you do get a red error like that, invariably, if you just go back, click into text, And sometimes I had to actually click twice in that case for that error to disappear. Then when I went back to design view, it actually had updated. So the point is now that linear layout has now been updated here, and that's what we're going to be using as we go throughout this application. So we're going to now delete this. So just going back to text tab briefly, you notice that we've got this in here. This is the text view for the hello world. We talked about that in the previous app, but we're going to remove that. And obviously, as a recap, once we remove it there, we go back to the text view, it gets deleted in there, or the text tab, it gets deleted in there. So any changes, again, that we're making in one of these modes, either the design tab or the text tab, the changes are reflected in the other one automatically. So it's really your personal preference as to which one you want to do. What I'm going to try and do in this application is I'm going to show you a bit of both. My personal preference is I tend to do a lot of things in the text tab, because you've got a little bit more flexibility. In actual fact, there are some things that can only be done in the text tab, as you saw there with the linear layout changes. But it is personal preference, and a lot of the things you can do in the text tab, you can also do in the design tab, and it's a little bit more intuitive, particularly if you're just starting out. So let's start with something basic. Let's actually change the background color of the screen. So one of the things you need to do when you're making these changes, you want to pay attention to what you're clicking on the screen. Now in this case, we haven't got any other controls or any other views, I should say, on the screen. But whatever you click, when you click it, the list of properties changes and is shown for that particular item. In this case, I'm actually clicking in here and there's no other views. So therefore the linear layout itself is actually selected. So making sure that linear layout is selected, going to the background over here. So I've clicked on the background, or clicked into the background property. Then click on these three little dots. When you do that, this little screen opens and you can click on color. And what you can actually do is you can actually put a color in there. You can actually select the color, and I'm just moving my mouse button, I'm just dragging. And you notice as I'm dragging, the color's changing. This is going to be ultimately what the color is going to be. But this here also, this is a hex code. And I'll just open that up a little bit better. Actually, it's not going to show us. But what that it's really an internet standard way of defining a color. So if you actually know what the hex code is, for argument's sake, you can actually just type that in. For example, I've got one that I can type in, AEE8E9. And notice as I type that in, I'm just going to copy that because I'll need that later. It changed that color. And you can actually find websites on the internet. If you do a search for color picker hex codes, you'll find a site where you can actually select these hex codes, or it'll actually give you the hex codes for particular colors. But because you've got this capability also of just selecting it like this, or just dragging it and clicking on OK, you notice when I've done that, it's actually updated and actually changed the color. And if I go back into the text mode and have a look, that's the actual line that was added for the background color. And conveniently, also notice this little color here. Android Studio is letting you know that when you're in text, in the text tab, by the way, that hex code equates to that color. And if I change the color back to the one that I had before, if I paste that in, notice how that changed there as well. So that's quite convenient to look on this this little section and to the right of the line numbers, because depending on what you're typing there, it can often give you some context and show you what's being updated. So we're going to stick to that code anyway, because that's quite a useful one. And depending on the mode you're in also, if you've got preview selected, when you're in the text tab, it'll actually show the emulator as well. And I can show you what I mean there. I'm not showing it for space reasons. Go down to preview. Now, you notice even though we're in text mode, we've actually got a view of representation, and I could change that back to something else like FFFFFF, and it's changed back to white, as you can see. I'll change that back to what it was. It changes there. So that can be useful to leave preview on. I'm not going to leave it on there now because Space has added a bit of a premium with what we're doing now. But if you want to do that, if it's not already on, go back to the view menu, tools, the tool windows, I should say, and click on preview. And I'll need to do that again just to turn it off. And of course, it's not letting me turn it off. So I'll leave that on for now. That should actually turn it on and off, but I do notice sometimes it actually doesn't do it, doesn't seem to update it. Okay, so moving on. So that's how to actually change the color. So let's continue on. And what we want to do now is we want to start adding some content to our view. So I'm going to go back to our layout, I should say. So I'm going to click on design, and we're going to start adding a few fields. So the first one we want to do is we want to add some instructions which tell people how to use the application. So I'm going to drag one of these widgets. I'm going to select large text. I've just clicked it once and I'm holding down the left mouse button. I'm going to drag it. And notice as I'm dragging with this layout, Android Studio is saying this is where I'm going to put it. And you saw in previous videos, we had more flexibility and it was going to change depending on what we did. But in this case, because we've chosen the linear layout, the only option is to actually put it to the top, because that's how a linear layout works. So I'm going to release the button now. When I release it, it actually adds in this case, the text view, which is the large text widget that we actually selected. So I'll talk more shortly about linear layout and why it's actually working like that. Part of the reason is, which you'll see when we start adding some other fields, is it's going to start adding these fields. We add another one, it'll start going to the right, but we'll talk more about that shortly. So that's the text field that has been added to the form now. So what I'll do, just to show you more how the linear layout works and the default mode, which is set to horizontal, the orientation, and to see that, click up here into linear layout. And if we have a look, orientation, the default is actually horizontal, even though it was unset, that is the default option. So I'm going to leave that, I'm putting it in there now, but that is the default anyway. And what that means is anytime I drag an item, it's actually going to drag it automatically and add it to the right of what previously has been there. So if I add another one, if I go back down and let's say for to select a checkbox and drag that, it's going to actually automatically add it. I've got the choice of adding it before or after, but the bottom line is it's only going to add it left to right. It's not allowing me to actually add it below. So I could do something like that, and the checkbox will be added to the right, as you can see there. And notice also it's showing you here in the component tree where it's been added. You can sort of see the order that it's actually in. And you'll start using the component tree quite often, particularly when you're building more complex interfaces, because it gives you a really good representation of the things that are on the screen. The other thing to let you know is you can actually double click one of these properties, like for example, the large text, and it gives you the most common fields to update. So we could actually change the text and the ID, which we've talked about in previous videos. Of course, the text is what we see on the screen, and the ID is the internal ID that we use to link up the code in Java to the actual view that's actually on screen. So we could change this to something like enter 2 numbers and leave the ID as text view and press enter. And notice how it actually changed the actual text to enter 2 numbers. And with checkbox, for example, this is context sensitive, so I could double click that. And notice how we've got some other options. We've got an option for checked as well. And by default, you can see that checkbox is off. But because that's a common option for a checkbox, we can actually click on checked. And that would be the default option. It would actually show us checked there. So that's just another thing that you can actually, a very convenient way to double click a view, because it really gives you the information, the most important fields to update, which is especially useful when you're actually setting up a form for the first time. But I'm going to delete the new checkbox now. Now, incidentally, in terms of selecting, we have been through this before, but just to confirm, you can either click them over here in the component tree, click on a particular view that you want to edit or change. Notice the properties are changing depending on what you've clicked, and likewise for the linear layout. So you select which one you want. In this case, I'm going to click, I've selected checkbox. I'm going to just press the delete button on my keyboard, and that actually removes it, as you can see, from the component tree, and obviously removed it from the screen as well. Okay, so I've entered the text, enter 2 numbers. It would actually be nice to center this, but just before we do that, I just want to talk to you more about some of the actual text appearances and how the attributes you can actually use to actually change things. So I'm going to go back to the text view. And what I'm going to do is actually this little part here where it's got Android text appearance. Now this was added automatically, and the reason that was added automatically was we actually dragged a large text. So the large text has actually got that as a property, as a way to represent larger text. So by doing that, the code that was added automatically by Android had this text appearance equals, then a question mark Android : etc. So what that is, that's just a way of describing a particular type of text that you want your form, your text on the screen to look like. So we can actually change that, and it's actually quite easy to change. What you can do is, so we can delete some characters. So for example, I'm going to delete the word large. Now if I instead, I notice when I did that to the right in the view, that changed in size. That's because we've got rid of the large. If we enter large again, we've got the large one again. But the other thing I want to point out is, as we delete it, if you press Command Space, you actually get a list of the other options, and we can't see them too well, and I don't think I can expand this because of the way that the view is working, but I can just select some just to show you the difference. So for example, medium, we'll get that other thing off the screen. I'm not sure how that thing got off the screen, so I'll just put it down to the bottom there. But this is basically a way of changing the appearance anyway. So we selected medium, we can go back and select large, and it'll change it back to large, as you can see to the right there. Bottom line is, you can actually type in part of it, and if you press Control Space, which works on Mac or Windows, you can actually change this and select other appropriate options automatically, which is pretty cool. So getting back to this screen here, the actual text, we'll change it back to large first. And it'd actually be good to see that being centered, because at the moment that's obviously looking what's actually left justified, and it's starting to the left-hand side of the screen. So if we want to actually change that so it's centered, what we need to do is make some changes actually in here in text view. So again, we can do this either in the design tab or the text tab. So let's start out by doing this in the text tab. We can actually type something in here. So we're just going to click on at the end of Android text, press enter to make another space. Now if I type GRAV, we actually get some options. We get Android layout _ gravity, and we get Android : gravity. So if we actually select Android gravity and choose center, notice how I double clicked in there and this came up with a list of options. Click center. That is actually a way to center the actual contents. But you'll notice when I've done that, nothing has actually changed. Well, the reason that nothing's changed is we've actually got this up here under layout _ width. We've used what's called a wrap content. So what wrap content effectively means is only use as much space as is needed. So in other words, if we make the text longer, notice how it's actually expanded out and used just enough space. That's what wrap content is. But what we actually want, if we actually want it to actually be centered, we can't actually center it because at the moment we've only got that much space. It's only allocated what it's needed, so therefore it can't center it because it physically hasn't got that extra space to be able to pad it, to be able to center it, in other words. What we would need to do is we need to change the layout width to what's called match parent. So if I type in match, again, Android will actually help. I've just typed in MA and it's come up and said, do you mean this? So I'll type in, I'll double click match parent. Notice when I've done that, it's now automatically centered it for us automatically, and I'll just get rid of the colon. And it is actually updating it on the fly. You'll notice that when you actually add some text or whatever, it will recenter it. So that's a very important one that you'll use a lot, match _ parent for a width to actually center it. And just to show you in design tab, you could do something similar. If we go back to the design tab, we can actually do the same thing. We've actually got, again, and this is where it's important to make sure you're selecting the right thing, because you might be looking at this layout width and saying, that's set to match parent, but wasn't layout height set to match parent? So if you go back and have a look, layout height was set to wrap content. But of course, the reason is up here in the component tree, I haven't selected the text view. So I need to click on the text view and whoops, I think I added another one by mistake there, so I'll just undo that. But now that that's selected, you'll notice that we've now correctly got the layout width as match _ parent and the layout height as wrap _ content. So that is a common error that you're wondering why things aren't working, is because you're selecting the wrong component when you're actually updating things on the screen. So do make sure you've done that. So again, just to confirm, we could have done the same thing here with match parent. We could change that back to wrap content, and notice how instantly on the actual screen itself, it's now gone and moved to the left, because it's now using exactly the amount of space it needs for the text that we've actually entered. So I'm going to set that back to match parent, so it's actually centered again. Now the other thing we need to do anyway, we actually want to change our form. So instead of adding fields left to right, we actually add them top to bottom. So in other words, we want to add them vertically. So to do that, we need to go back to our linear layout. So I'm going to click on that. And we need to find this orientation. Before, you recall that was actually empty, and then I set it to horizontal. If I now set that to vertical, we've now changed, you can now see that it's changed up here to vertical. And what will happen now is if the forms, every time we actually drag a new field to this page now, we should find the actual field will be added top to bottom. So instead of going left to right, in this case, we want to do that because we want to have the next two fields to be the data, or to be the actual numbers that people type in, so that we can actually start using, creating our calculator effectively. So to do that, we want to go down here to text fields. And I want to choose one. I'm going to make a bit more space here so I can see these things. We want to choose decimal, because we're going to, with our calculator, we're going to allow people to type in a decimal number with decimal points and to perform some operations on that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that, and I'm just going to drag it. And notice how when I'm dragging now, it's actually repositioning things. In the past, you recall it was left or right, but now if I actually put it there, and the other thing I want to point out is notice the green lines, how it's highlighting, meaning it's giving you some sort of context to say, when I release this, this is where it's going to be added. So if I release that now, you'll see that that's actually been added below the field, where before it was actually added, it was being added either to the left or to the right of the field. And that's directly to do with the fact that we've actually changed the orientation now to vertical. So we've got one edit text there now, which is our first place to enter a number, but we want to have two numbers so that we can perform operations on them. So I'm just going to get another decimal number. I'm going to do the same thing. And again, notice the green line, how that's bolded. It's a little bit bigger, which really gives you some context that when you release your mouse button, that's where it's going to be added. So in this case, I'm going to add it down there again. So we've now automatically got 2 decimal or number fields, and effectively they will allow you to use decimal numbers. So you can actually type numbers into them. And they're really set up, they're like a regular text field that you've seen in operation before, but they actually allow us to actually enter decimal numbers. The other thing that we can do, sometimes when you are creating a layout, you might want to add some extra space. So in this case, I think that's a little bit too close. The top decimal field, the edit text, is actually a little bit too close to there. So what we're going to do is add a bit of space. So to do that, we can just click on the view that we want to change. In this case, it's the first edit text, and we can actually change that quite easily. We then go over to here once I've selected it to margin. What I'm going to do is add a number. So I'm going to type 25. I'm just going to press enter. Now notice when I pressed enter, 2 things happened. Firstly, DP was added to the end automatically, but secondly, this was also moved down. So DP stands for density pixels, and what it is, it's a way to use a relative number that's going to work on all platforms. So for example, if you had a device, like a phone, an Android phone, and it had a maximum width and height of 320 pixels, and you had another device that was double that, so in other words 640 wide by 640 down, you could understand that it would be difficult trying to create an application that actually worked on both devices and centered things, because you've got different numbers of pixels and so forth. Well, this density pixels has been invented by Google to actually work, so it actually handles and looks at that automatically. And really the bottom line is that it helps that from your layout point of view, for things to work on all devices, which is pretty good. It does a really good job of actually positioning things automatically. So that's density pixels. So we'll be talking more about that a little bit later. The bottom line is we added one now, and it seems to be working quite nicely. And once I've done that, if we go back to text mode, you can see it's automatically added this for us. It's actually added that line, layout underscore margin top equals 25 dp. So you could have done the equivalent thing there by typing that in, or use the design tab and actually entered it in there. Okay, well, this video is getting quite long, so I'm going to stop the video here. In the next video, we're going to come back and we'll run this application in the emulator just to make sure that it's working, and then we'll go on to enhancing this a little bit more. So I'll see you in that next video.